Hello and welcome to Eternal Durdles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Blackman. Phil, how's it going, man?
Good, bro. Just trying to get hydrated for this banger episode we're about to record.
I hear you, man. I'm on some yerba mate today.
What's going on, man? How you doing?
I'm doing good. It's been a pretty interesting week. Obviously, we've got the video stuff going, and that seems to be going well. People seem to like the deck text, which is pretty cool. It's really cool to watch how that's starting to like overtake the audio content on our podcast.
If you haven't watched any of Zach's deck text yet, go to the YouTube channel, check out the deck text. You've got 3 out at the time of this recording, right?
Yeah, and at the time of this recording, actually, we will have passed because we record on Wednesday, post Monday. So Friday we'll also have another deck tech that'll be for Blue Red Delver, and also I'm going to start coming up with some Patreon curated sideboard content. So a little more. I'm trying to make some useful resources for people who are either just getting into the format or have been into the format for a while and are looking to expand to different decks and stuff. So I feel like you kind of have to start with Blue Red Delver as far as a place to just, like everybody ends up playing that deck or playing against that deck at a tournament.
Yeah, of course. It's the most popular deck. It's very good, and it's going to continue to be good. It's been the best deck in Legacy for over a decade, 12 years?
Yeah, it's been
ever since Innistrad. It's been the best deck since Innistrad.
Yeah, ever since you could flip a Delver blindly, right?
Yeah, ever since Delver was released, it has been the best thing you can be doing.
Yeah, it just the deck. The only things that change in the deck are your secondary creatures. Really, it's the classic shell. I don't want to get too far into that because you can check out that video, right? Yeah. You can go check out that video and see for yourself. But those videos are basically just like quick, like this is what the deck is. And the plan is to get even further into the weeds eventually and do like sideboarding guides, deck updates and stuff like that as we go along. So if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, you should do that because we're going to be constantly coming up with stuff, and it's going to eventually be relevant to you if it's not already relevant to you, right?
Yeah, it's more Magic content, and the quality is actually pretty good. Not to toot our own horn here, but yeah. Like as we've been progressing, we've been getting more stuff. We've been using the value that our Patreon supporters have been giving us to like up that content. You've been crushing it. So
we started a business this week, guys.
Pretty good.
Hit like if you like that we actually are a business now.
Yeah, we wanted to. We were like, well, we gotta. If Streets of New Capenna is coming out soon, we gotta get into that mindset.
Yeah, we gotta you gotta get all your collateral together, and we basically need your Patreon support so that we can stay Halo rich, right?
As much as I think like hustle culture is toxic and sucks, we're in it. So
yeah, I mean this is less that and more like, hey, this is something we've been wanting to do for a while, and I think that it's just it's fun to produce content personally. Like I've been having a blast doing it, so.
And now we're doing it.
With that out of the way, let's talk about what's going on with this week's episode.
Dude, I want to talk about, we all have heard the idea of who's the beatdown and role assessment.
Of course.
And I want to talk about how role assessment, how you can do that in present day, and why it's important, B, how you actually do that in a way that's effective, and C, how that changes from matchup to matchup, obviously. And I have a really good example that from the last SCGCON in Indianapolis that I want to go through that was just a pretty clear-cut understanding of what the role in the matchup was from the Blue-Red Delver side. The matchup is a Blue-Red Delver versus Jeskai Dazan doing. And we'll walk through the points, and I'll give certain moments in a matchup like that where when you know your opponent's deck list or have metagame awareness of what their deck is most likely to look like, that you can then make those informed decisions that are attuned to what you believe your role in the matchup to be at every given moment. So we're going to get into it.
Yeah. So let's real quick kind of talk about SCG Indianapolis. I think one thing that we can both say about the top 8 and even the top 16 for that tournament is that there's nothing out of the ordinary happening in this meta, right? Like it's blue red aggro, Grixis, Artifacts Blue, which is a deck that they're called. It's 8 cast, right? Artifacts Blue. Like, why would you call it that? Elves, and then like blue red aggro down, 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 right? Even the next couple of decks. So the top 16, we've got 6 blue red aggro decks, aka blue, Is It Delver? You've got the Jeskai Days Undoing deck, and Reanimator, Landstill, and then the top 8, you've got 3 blue red aggro decks. Burn made it to the top 8. That's amazing to me. Like burn, like that deck is always there at every tournament, but you never really see it make top 8. So that's pretty cool to see that happen.
Yeah, burn is always gonna, like, it's just there. If you're not prepared for it, you can get buried by it. I think like a lot of the decks, like if they didn't run into Uro at all, it's like you can really breeze through a bunch of people, particularly since Price of Progress is probably the best it's been in my lifetime at this point.
Price Progress, man, that card just gets better and better. And that's that's a card that we even see in some of the best blue red Delver decks are playing like 1 or 2 main deck just to get people. That's that.
If you see Price of Progress in blue red, you know that person's there to send the messages and isn't trying to fuck around.
Yep. So yeah, let's talk about this matchup, Phil.
Yeah. So I just want to give an example. I think the blue red Delver, essentially stock blue red Delver, that's like your 13 threats, the 12 that you're thinking of plus Brazenbauer, all of the good blue red cards, no nonsense, clean mana base. Like I think it's like 4 Bulks, an island, and then like 9 fetches with 4 Wasteland. Really clean, with a Mystic Sanctuary as a way to go long because you're expecting to grind. That's clever. And I think that Mystic Sanctuary has kind of just been adopted for the most part. Not everybody's doing it. It doesn't fit everybody's play style, but man, does it look good on camera or any of the matches that you saw at SCG. The blue red Delver players were able to keep up because just mystical tutoring for another expressive iteration when you want it is amazing. So to get into the matchup, Jeskai Days Undoing, it's mono 3-drop prison combo deck. Your 8 white spells between Swords and Prismatic Ending, your blue cantrip suite. You're running your forces, some amount of force negation sometimes, but otherwise it's like 7 walkers between Narset and Teferi. It's usually a 4-3 split in favor of Narset, maybe some number of Hull Breacher, not always, and then 1 to 3 Days Undoing, and you're looking essentially to control the game just long enough to stick a Narset plus a Days Undoing. You mind twist your opponent, go up 7 cards, and you can't lose.
Yeah, I mean, after that happens, like, why do you even keep playing? I feel like if you have a Narset out and you cast Days Undoing, the game is essentially over unless your opponent has like lethal on board.
The game is over, yeah. Unless there's some kind of board presence, the game is over, and it's okay to concede. You've just been comboed, and it's okay. Combo happens. But essentially, the blue-red player in the finals, I believe it's Spickelmeyer. I believe is his name, Clay. Did I get it right?
In the final match, is Theodore Jung.
The final of, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the matchup from the team event.
Oh,
not the 5K. So anyway, the match that I watched, it was an incredible match to watch from the blue-red player side of the board. I mean, obviously we're seeing both players, but it was the reason that I thought of role assessment in a matchup, because Clay did a really exceptional job navigating the matchup and understanding what his role in the matchup was. And there were a couple of key moments that really highlighted his understanding of how the matchup worked, particularly post-board, and how to navigate the matchup as such to win in really tight positions. So one thing that is, let's say I mean, we understand who the beatdown is, right? Like we understand the idea of this.
The beatdown, obviously. Right?
Blue red's the beatdown. So anybody who doesn't know, like the idea of who's the beatdown comes from a long article written by Michael Flores years ago.
On the dojo.
On the dojo. And it's just an article that's essentially saying, are you trying to play a control role, an aggressive role, understanding in a matchup what position you're supposed to take, so the decisions that you make are informed by understanding what your role is. So if both players are trying to play the control role, one person's going to be doing it better than the other because they're actually in a position to do so, or their deck is built to do so, and vice versa. If you're both aggro decks, one of you can't be beating down the other. Classic blue-red Delver style mirror is if somebody leads on a threat and then you wasteland them on the draw, you don't really understand. You probably don't understand your role in the matchup because you're trying to play anyway, not to get too far.
I think the classic example he used was the Suicide Black deck back in the day that used Hatred and like Flesh Reaver versus a burn deck. And normally you would think that the burn deck was the aggressor, but because the Suicide Black deck was more of a combo deck, just like kind of setting it up to like win kind of immediately with hatred, that it was smarter for the red player to hold back things like shock and they weren't playing lightning bolt, but like shock and incinerate to get their creatures, and then like play the long game and eventually win through attrition, beating their opponent down, or occasionally having something like a shock to get them if they go too low, casting hatred.
Yeah, well,
as a guy who's read the article multiple times.
That's just knowing what your role is. That's the idea of who's the beatdown. It's just a colloquial way of saying what's my role.
Yeah, know your role.
So in this particular matchup, right, we know that in this particular matchup, they also knew each other's deck list. They're in top 8. They know what's in each other's deck list. There are no secrets here. So in that type of position, you can analyze what kind of role you should be playing way better than if you were going in blind, where you might be caught off guard by something that isn't common in every stock list.
Yeah.
So the one particular moment is understanding between game 1 and post-board games that the Jeskai Day's Undoing deck, which is the control deck in the matchup, like it's going to be the control deck in the matchup, even though Expressive Iteration does give Blue-Red Delver the capacity to keep up on cards and potentially go up on cards beyond the Blue-White player, because the Blue-White player doesn't play any raw card draw. It is simply tacked on incidental card draw through Narset and Teferi. So those are card advantage spells, but they do other things. The point that they're in the deck is not for necessarily the card draw. The card draw is incidental. They're there for the static abilities, where Expressive is just raw cards. It's selection, but it's raw cards, and that's why it's in the deck. So understanding why those cards are there. From Spickelmeyer's standpoint, he's the only one with the Wastelands. Jeskai Day's Undoing is not a Wasteland deck. It's mono 3 drops, can't afford it.
Yep.
From Spickelmeyer's side, understanding his role as the beatdown in game 1, because his opponent's only way to remove Murktide Regent is Swords to Plowshares and Teferi, and then a couple of Supreme Verdicts. That's it. 10 spells deals with Murktides, but Murktides are huge and can close doors pretty quickly. So if you can navigate that, I need to either play around Supreme Verdict, or I need to keep them off double white if that's possible, or I just need to play around Swords to Plowshares or be able to fight over a Swords so I can jam through a Murktide and really get in some heavy damage beyond incidental beats from the early game on your 1-drops.
Yeah,
between DRC and Delver.
And also Pyroblast, they do have access to Pyroblast afterwards.
So Pyroblast is post-board.
Yeah.
Pre-board, and this is why it's important understanding the matchup and understanding what cards you are looking to align in the matchup that you're playing. In main board games, where there are way less outs to Murktide can go after Planeswalkers more freely than they can in post-board games. And this is really where it's important to understand what your role in the matchup is. Spickelmeyer understood that post-board, he is the aggro player. He has to be the beatdown.
You've got to get in those points of damage. And
you got to get in those points of damage.
The Planeswalkers, right?
Murktide is functionally a Tarmogoyf in that matchup post-board. So between Swords to Plowshares, Pyroblasts, the Teferis that are still in there, the Supreme Verdicts that are still in there, there's a lot more, and all of the bad cards that the player doesn't want against Blue-Red Delver are going to come out of the deck. The deck post-board is just more densely flushed to deal with the plan that Blue-Red Delver was bringing to the table, which is vanilla threats, get in there.
Yeah.
And there's one moment in the match where there's a Teferi on the table, and Spickelmeyer has the opportunity to use his Murktide to attack down the Planeswalker rather than use a removal spell on it, Pyroblast or a Bolt. Instead, he chooses to go face and then use, I believe it was a Lightning Bolt, use a Lightning Bolt to finish off the Walker. Or no, maybe it was a Red Blast, because that would make more sense as to why it was a harder draw. But use the Red Blast on the Walker, and then his Murktide proceeds to die. But he later would go on to win that game by Exaxes, because he understood the Planeswalkers on the table aren't what like Narset threatening a kill on a combo is bad, but Teferi on the table isn't actually what matters, even though it turned all of his counter magic. What matters is ensuring that Murktide converts some amount of damage before it leaves the table. The density of cards that are in his opponent's deck that can remove that Murktide are so flush that the idea that the Murktide is ever going to have an opportunity to connect like that is so few and far between that maximizing the opportunity and taking it, using resources, even if it puts you down cards to get the Planeswalker off the table, but connecting with that Murktide for 6 damage is way more valuable, even if the opponent has the capacity to combo you.
Yeah, they're just going to draw into another threat, and if they don't have one, you should be getting that damage in any opportunity you have.
The creature would go on to like be killed not long later, but then he would win via Xaxes off of a lightning bolt, and he only got to that point of Xaxes because he made that one particular attack on the Murktide, where the Murktide could have just taken out the Walker and kept up maintaining cards, but instead he's like, I'm going to let that Teferi go up a card, I'm going to throw this Murktide at your face instead, and then eventually he went on to win Xaxes, and he only did it because of that choice to not go after the Walker there. Similarly, he is the Wasteland deck in the matchup. His opponent does not have Wasteland, but deck lists are open. Even if deck lists weren't open, the Jeskai Days Undoing deck, we talked about it multiple times in this cast. The reason that I think the deck is absolute shit, even though it puts up so many numbers, is the curve is fucking awful. We had Tim come on the show. He like won that initial challenge that sort of put this deck all over the place. And we talked to him about how the curve at 2 is just non-existent. They don't have any 2-drops. They have like a Dress Down, maybe 2.
Snapcaster,
which Snapcaster is
not a 2-drop.
It's not a 2-drop.
It's not a 2-drop.
So the deck goes from like 16 1-drops and then leaps over to like 14 3-drops and then like a couple of 4-drops and then you're free counter magic. So there's nothing going on at 2. So if you're the Beatdown, all right, like let's say if I am trying to navigate knowing what my opponent's position is, I know that when I need to play, in terms of sequencing my land drops, right, and actually when I'm going to deploy spells, I know my opponent cannot combo this particular combo deck between Narset and Days Undoing. They cannot combo if they do not have 6 mana, right? Either they have to have a Narset on the table.
They have to wait till turn 4, or they have to wait till they have 6 mana, one or the other.
They either untap with a Narset or they have 6 mana in both cards, right? But they cannot, if they don't have Narset on the table, they cannot combo beyond earlier than having 6 mana on the table. Which means that if you are the Wasteland player and you're thinking about when am I supposed to deploy this Wasteland to actually maximize this effect, if you cut their 4th land and send them back to 3, their play patterns on the cards that are in their deck aren't going to change. No. They can operate on 3. They're playing 3-drops. So unless you're trying to maximize the days, because you're going to try and catch a 3-drop, if you're trying to offset them being able to combo, the difference between them getting cut at 5 mana versus 6 mana is significant, because if they stick their 6th land drop, they can kill you.
So what you're saying is if you wasteland their 4th land and you could have used that land to cast some other spell, you would have been better off using that mana, that colorless mana, to cast a spell than wasting your turn, stopping them from doing nothing on their next turn.
I'm saying that like knowing your role, if you understand the role that you're trying to play the aggressor, it can seem like, okay, I'm the aggressor, I need to fire off my resources, deprive them of resources, and get in for as much damage as I possibly can as fast as I can. But in this particular kind of matchup, where you understand where the clinch points are for the opposing deck, which is why you can understand when you're the Beatdown and when you're not the Beatdown throughout a match, if you understand how your deck lines up against another known deck in the meta. So if you're familiar with the matchup or understand the play patterns of the matchup through your reps, through practice, whatever, you can assess when you need to go on the Beatdown and when you can play the control role. So there was a good portion in the match where Spiegelmeier was just passing the turn back and forth, just playing draw go with this guy. And it was the reason was because Mystic Sanctuary gave him access to be able to go up on cards with Expressive Iteration, knowing that his opponent doesn't have any raw card advantage spells outside of his Planeswalkers and Jace, which is also a Planeswalker. So it's like the only things that the opponent can go up on raw cards are through through the actual threats, which you want to fight over anyway. Moving into a control role for a little while and amassing raw resources so that then you can effectively play the Beatdown when that opportunity arises by protecting your threats, that is also really critical. So if you're thinking to yourself, okay, I want to use this Wasteland, there's a juicy target on the table, I want to cut him off of a color or cut him, just hit the duel. Thinking about when to do that poses a lot of opportunity cost. Because if playing that Wasteland and cutting that land meant that you didn't make your own land drop to potentially,
if you're not progressing the board,
if you're in that position.
Exactly. If you're not progressing the board,
what does that matter?
You know, you just you time walked yourself.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It's like if you were thinking, how can this wasteland most effectively disrupt my opponent? Cutting them in a certain position where they can't actually punish you in any meaningful way based on your assessment of who is playing what role in the matchup at that particular point in the match, then you aren't necessarily maximizing that wasteland in the best way that you could.
Yeah.
Because if you can use that wasteland while they're under some amount of pressure, if you're playing the beatdown, that's going to be more valuable. Or if you're playing the control role, maybe you don't need to deprive them yet because you're trying to go up raw resources and then find a critical moment that you can then play the beatdown by navigating a path for yourself. So understanding that the deck has a critical weak point in its 2-drop slot, meaning they can't 2-spell me if I cut them from going from 5 to 6, they can't 2-spell me in a meaningful way. They can maybe deploy one of their 3-drop threats, and then at most it's a removal spell or a cantrip. They have no follow-up threat that they can do. Or they can stick a 4-drop and then no other plays. So they're going to single spell, which means that if I'm going to fight over that threat in that position, I can fire up a Pyroblast, and either they won't have the mana to support it with their own opposing blasts, or they'll have to use their free counter magic. And if I am navigating a position where they're going to 2-for-1 themselves, that means that they're either going to 2-for-1 themselves with another threat or a cantrip that could potentially help them get out of the hole that I'm aiming to navigate through by disrupting them in a certain way. So if you can figure out and it's part of the reason why Blue-Red Delver has been as solid of a deck as it's been for its entire existence, is because there isn't really any specific critical weakness that can be exploited a lot of the time. It's a very efficient deck, and it's very contained. It's very redundant.
It's quite linear too. So you know, it just everything that deck does, it's doing the best version of that thing in the format. You know,
right? And so. And because it has expressive now, and now the adoption of Mystic Sanctuary to further go down that avenue, it can more clinically play and shift between those roles as necessary in given matchups, which is why the deck being so flexible and being efficient is really important. But the Just Got Gaze Undoing deck, it has a lot of hammers. It's an extremely powerful deck, especially because the lock pieces between Narset and Teferi are just fucking backbreaking and gross. But the deck itself fundamentally has just an incredibly exploitable weakness in the fact that it has no 2-drops. So it can't 2-spell as effectively because it's so clunky. So it's trading efficiency for power level. And that can be exploited by a deck with the tools to exploit how it's inefficient and be able to 2-spell faster and go up overall resources or play to the board faster than they can keep up. So
and if there's no better time to test these theories out as well than on Moto right now, because you have that like $25 ticket situation where you get access to all the cards.
Yeah,
you can literally play these out and learn them for yourself and see exactly what Phil's talking about here. If you play Blue-Red Delver against this deck and you put these theories to the test, you're going to see they work.
This is just one example too. I'm just using this particular matchup because it inspired me, because as I'm watching it, I know from playing a lot of control decks that when I saw that one attack from Clay go at his opponent with the Murktide as opposed to the Teferi, it immediately clued into me that I'm like, okay, this player understands the role of the matchup.
Yeah,
this player understands the way to use the tools in the deck against the opponent in the way that is most effective to win the game. Particularly from the control side, I think to myself, if my walkers that I can't combo with are absorbing me 6 life, that's multiple draw steps. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's like a life gain spell plus drawing cards, because you know at the end of the day, those planeswalkers also help you draw cards. So like you're not only time walking yourself by attacking those creatures, you're also giving your opponent like 2 extra card draws. So it makes sense to just end the game as fast as possible in that scenario.
I do want to caveat though that like this decision this one particular scenario that I'm talking about, this isn't the end all be all.
No, it's not always right, for sure. Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. This isn't always right. I'm saying that like the understanding, being able to assess what your role is in a matchup by understanding where the weaknesses of your opponent's deck are and how your tools line up against theirs on paper, in practice, all of that will allow you to navigate those scenarios and make those decisions rather than being like, what's right? There's an argument both ways. If you can assess what your role is in that position, there will be many a time in life where you will have the Murktide and it will be correct to go after the Teferi. But given the resources and the play at the time, recognized he was the beatdown and his opponent, he was better positioned to let his opponent have the Teferi and not allow him to use his counter, not allow Spiegelmeier to use his counter magic to get in this 6 damage than it was to be able to turn part of his hand back on. Like that is an assessment that you can only make if you recognize in that position that you are the beatdown and 6 damage is better than raw cards and agency, right? And that's difficult to do because when you have the opportunity to get a Teferi off the table, you're probably best set up to get the Teferi off the table. Not in this one particular instance.
In this particular instance, it made sense to do it. So it's not only knowing the matchup, it's knowing where you are in the matchup as well. And what's important,
right, but that's why knowing your role and who's the beatdown, that will change multiple times throughout a game. It'll change multiple times throughout a match. And so if you can, the thing is that you're on a clock, right? So if you can understand where those moments are against your opponent, you can more critically assess faster those decision trees. So you aren't, thinking about every single moment for way too long and cutting yourself off time. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like if you can assess like what positions are supposed to be better for you and do that thing faster, that's why it's important to, like, when you're thinking through games, when you're making a decision, you're not just thinking what is better in a vacuum. You're thinking what is better in this moment, and the way to do that is understanding what your role is. And if you can assess that, that's going to be a very valuable skill going forward. I highly recommend watching the Team Trios Legacy Finals match between those decks because it is a clinic from the blue-red player side. I don't remember much from the Jeskai player side because every time I watch that matchup, for the most part, you're kind of just slamming haymakers because that's what the deck does. There isn't really as much room for maneuvering until you're at a very well-developed state of the game, which is like where the deck looks to go anyway. But still, highly recommend that matchup. Spiegelmeier put on a clinic.
Awesome. So let's thank our sponsor, Moxfield. Moxfield is a really great deck building website made by my childhood friends, John and Harry. Moxfield, you can go to moxfield.com and it's just one of the cleanest, most easy to use deck building websites. They also have this really cool app called Moxel, which is like Wordle, but for Magic cards. So definitely check that out. It's a lot of fun. But yeah, so I share all of our deck lists on Moxel. You can check out the links below for that. They're all under my personal account. I have a lot of EDH deck lists and stuff on there too. It's already a great spot for EDH, but I'd like to see it become a really great spot for Legacy as well. So if you want to support the cast, that's a great way to do it. Just go to moxfield.com and sign up. So what else should we talk about? I think something we brought up with Nate over the last couple of days is that you pointed out we missed one of the cards in our unbanning episode.
Yeah, I posted a poll on Twitter that said, which is the more powerful card, Library of Alexandria or Urza Saga?
And it was what, like
what's your choice?
75 to 25?
Yeah, I mean, granted, I don't have 1 million followers on Twitter, so it was only 46 people in the poll, but the majority, 2/3 of the majority said that Urza Saga is more powerful. I also think that Urza Saga is more powerful. And, I stirred up a conversation to, advocate that Library of Alexandria should be unbanned as part of, because we didn't talk about it in our unbanned video. And I think Library of Alexandria, as powerful as it is, I don't know if it would have a home in today's Legacy.
I think that
I don't know if it would see any play in today's Legacy.
Again, minus the fact that it's on the reserve lists. We're not going to talk about the financial aspect of that. Power level is a card.
Let me say one thing about the financial aspect.
Yeah.
One thing I'm like, because my boy Eric Virgo, we love you, buddy. We love you. One of the things that he came back in the comments, he just posted the price tag of the library, which is like $1,300.
Yeah.
And I think that anytime we have an unbanned discussion, the talk about how much cards cost, that ship has long sailed for Legacy.
It's gone.
Long sailed. No more. If we're thinking about unbanning cards, no more is the argument of how much it costs to do so. Can that reasonably be in the discussion when mana bases by themselves are locking people out of the format?
Yeah.
So,
and honestly, $1,300. Like, let's talk about Tabernacle of Pendrell Vale. That said, let's ignore the financial aspect of this card because it's
literally I think
it's not even up for discussion. It's not like they're ever going to reprint it, right? But if we're talking about this, we have to get rid of that, right? So this card, probably out of all the cards we talked about, has the strongest argument for it not being banned anymore because
it's crazy. It's crazy that's really true.
In a world where you're on the play, do you want to play this on turn 1 into a wasteland? You don't.
Not only if you're on the play, that means that if you're on the play, so you just do nothing. You draw a card in the first 2 turns. You can't deploy to the board.
You can't.
You say go.
Yeah. I think if they reprinted this card as an island, it still might be unplayable. You know?
Like, no. Whoa. Zach, I'm gonna retract that statement for you. Because that's egregious. There's no way that if it were an island, it's
if you think I'm right, you should like the video right now.
No. It's like, I can't even get into that one to just try and work somebody up. That's just an egregious that we're retracting that. On behalf of Zach, I retract it. If it were an island, it still wouldn't be broken.
Fine.
It would be broken.
But let's go back to what I was saying. If you're on the play, you play this and you pass turn. Next turn, you draw to your 6th card, right? Like no, you draw to your 7th card, you draw a card, and then like you play a land. Yeah, you're getting value, but like you're gonna eventually want to progress your board, right? And that's not something you can just take several turns to like gain card advantage up to 7. It's great in old school, but it does not work really in legacy. Too much is already going on, right? And you have to be able to cast other spells to stop your opponent from killing you. And if it's on the draw, like it's the same kind of thing, right?
No, I mean on the draw, you it's better because you just get a card immediately.
So of course, but what I'm saying is like it's still very likely to be wastelanded away.
Totally. On the draw, it's obviously better because if you get it onto the board, then you can actually convert a card even if it's wastelanded. Yeah. Where on the draw, if they just waste it, you can't. You just simplified the game state. The thing is that like Legacy right now is so A, it's fast. B, it's super color intensive. What letter am I on? C, all of the other colorless lands that are competing against it are better for what a lot of the decks want to do. Urza Saga is a win condition by itself. So we were having this conversation with Nate, who honorary host of the cast still. He was telling we were debating is like what is the actual powerful part of Library of Alexandria, and he pointed out that really, I made the argument rather that Urza Saga's power level can only ever go up because they can only ever print more artifacts that it will be able to tutor for, and therefore its power level, the floor of its power level is the current time that we live in it with it forever. It will only ever increase in power. Whereas Library of Alexandria's power is flat. It will only be able to draw cards at 7 cards in hand. The argument that I made was it's equivalent to Dark Confidant versus Snapcaster. Dark Confidant's always only going to flip 1 card every turn during your upkeep. Snapcaster's power will increase as more spells get printed. It just has more options.
And for what it's worth, Library of Alexandria gets even worse if you have to mulligan. Urza Saga pretty much stays the same.
Urza Saga is pretty good on a mulligan because it's it's by itself 6 power and a tutor.
Yeah.
So Nate brought up the point that the increase in free spells has improved the power of Library of Alexandria. Of course, if you can't use your mana to cast spells because you're drawing cards, you're going to use those. My thought on that is all of the free spells are 2-for-1s, and that means that you're not going to be able to draw cards for very long with Library. But that there is a point there that free spells do increase the power of Library of Alexandria. I was then trying to think, what kind of deck would Library even be put in? It's a deck that can't really commit cards to the board, that don't go up cards immediately, that don't replace themselves immediately in hand to maintain 7 cards in hand. And then it's also a colorless land. So I'm like, does that mean that your removal has to be like Dismember and shit? Is that where I really struggled to think of where Library would fit in any deck now.
I've tried to play it because I owned one for a while. I tried to play it in Vintage, and it's just like not a card you want to play in Vintage. Like even if you're playing like a draw go style deck, like you need to be dropping 2 cards for Force of Wills, and it's great in old school. It's a wonderful collector's item. If you don't own one, you should, right? Like, but
I'm also trying to think of like where like, let's say library was unbanned, right? Hypothetically, library comes off the ban list. You can play 4 library in your deck.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I would want to experiment, but I don't even know where. So you have to be at most 1 color deck, right? You can't just play this colorless land in your deck that may or may not have text in a matchup, right? You want to play. I would think you want to play 4 because it's most powerful in your opening hand, right?
Sure.
And then it can stack in multiples if you put
you can put it on the stack, draw,
right? Okay. I mean, are we looking to do that as like to go up into 8 cards and discard cards? Or is this like something we play in Reanimator and then remove discard outlets? But then, like, does that mean that we're also getting rid of Unmask? Is it a different kind of Reanimator deck? Yeah. Are we actually trying to play the control deck, or we just always have 7 cards in hand somehow? But now we're playing 4 colorless lands in our deck that opens us up to Wasteland, cuts us off of being able to play Mystic Sanctuary as effectively, and also means that whatever color intensity we have is going to be really stunted. Like, double blue and double white are not easy in a Wasteland format. Like, it's just not.
I have a theory. Do you think that this card would even be playable now if they did the opposite, right, and said Library of Alexandria but 0 instead of 7? Do you think that would be playable?
Yes.
Yeah, you think?
Yeah, because then you're just incentivized to dump your hand onto the table.
Yeah,
which is really easy to do. Like, there's a lot of decks that are
happy to dump their entire
hand onto the table. It's a lot easier to dump your hand onto the table than it is to maintain 7 cards in hand. Like,
yes, it's easier to have no cards than it is to have exactly 7. That is true.
Exactly 7, maintaining exactly 7 versus just spewing onto the table. It's way easier to spew.
Yeah.
And the decks that spew often want a way to recoup cards. Look at 8 cast. Like,
it's literally like saying they would spew into this.
Yes, they would happily take if it was 0 cards. Yeah. I think that I would assume the position that if library were unbanned, it would see fringe play at most. But if you put me to the poll of will it be a staple, or will it be unplayed, like just not played at all, I would bet that it would just not be played at all. I think it falls into a similar camp of like the ideas that Mana Drain could bring to the table if it were unbanned. Counterspell is already one of, maybe
you play a one of occasionally, right?
Occasionally, if you're two possibilities that you're playing Counterspell, you're me, or you've just completely decided to not keep up with the times. So
I mean, would you even try and play it in like an Artifacts blue deck? Everything needs blue mana.
Well, that's what I mean. All of the color intensity now of all of the premier decks, the colorless mana that you get on the back half would mean that you have to make a deck building concession. So what are you even dumping that mana into?
No, like, I can't see anything.
Also, Mana Drain, it's like, okay, you'll get 1 colorless mana. That's probably the most effective means that you'll be able to do it. You trade it down, but then you made up for it with the colorless mana.
Well, like, I mean, you know, in a perfect world, you counter your opponent's Kappa Cannoneer, right? And
right. Yeah, of course,
mana.
Like,
and Magical what do you even do with that, right? Like
in Magical Christmas Land, what do you even do? Yeah. So theoretically, Mana Drain being on the reserve list, it's been reprinted. They can just reprint it more if they wanted to bring it back up. We're going on to Mana Drain a little bit. But like Mana Drain, let's say you played a 1-drop and I countered it with Mana Drain. Well, I'm down a mana. I'm gonna go back to mana parity on my next main phase with a colorless mana that hopefully I can use, which means that I have to commit to the board somehow or commit to something that may not be the best time for
it. Might not be. Yeah, it's that was my biggest problem with getting that card in the format is that you can't convert it, right? Like you can't
reliably convert it.
Now, would I play it in a deck that I would play Counterspell in? Sure, why not? Like I would,
of course,
if it's a free roll, it's not doing. You know, back in the day, it would do mana burn to you, so that it could actively kill you if you cast it at the wrong time, which I think was a much bigger deal. But like now, what are you gonna like untap your Retrofitter Foundry? You know, like
I think that's what I mean. That's like if I'm playing Mana Drain in my deck, I'm thinking to myself, okay, like I need to be able to
sinks,
I need to play sinks because I need to up, like if Counterspell is a lot of the time going to trade down in mana, I need to be able to recoup that mana somehow. And the way that I would do that is in a sink. And hopefully that mana sink is a playable card in some capacity. Going back to library, I don't see where library could even exist, because it would not be able to cast any of your 1-drops that are all color intensive. It doesn't, if you're a control deck that's playing Mystic Sanctuary, it doesn't commit to your island count. You're not going to be able to play it in an Uro deck that really wants to go blue, blue, green, green.
Yep.
Narset wants double white. So does that mean that you're just going to expose your entire mana base to Wasteland? I just like, I guess it would have to open up, like, we would have to assume the position that it's just a powerful enough of an effect as a 4/of that you would build new decks with it, and that might be good.
I mean, like, I think that's the argument for mana drain, is that you'd have to build completely new. There'd be completely new decks. That use that card. I think we're on the exact same thought pattern with that. Is that you would need to build something that took full advantage of that card, and it'd almost be like Death Shadow, where like the whole deck is bent around Death Shadow.
I would be curious to see, because like obviously if you unban library, I can't think of a reason why it wouldn't be optimal to play 4. If you're trying to maximize the best thing that you could be doing with library, which is have it in your opener and draw cards immediately, that you would want to play 4 because you want to open it.
Yeah.
What does that mean though? Is, you know, on the financial aspect, nobody's shelling out, you know, $5,000 for a set of libraries, but online that shit's free.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right?
I would love to just see what the community would do with access to 4 library and like if you could play 4 library, where do the decks actually go?
SCGCON Legacy Unban, they do the Legacy Unban like they did the Modern Unban.
I'm like, are you a colorless control deck? Are you like, what? How do you even? Where do you even start? What do you even do? How do you maintain 7 cards in your hand at all times? I don't know, but like, it sounds fascinating to me. It doesn't seem like at this point that library is powerful enough to remain on the ban list. Like, if the argument is just like, yeah, it's too pricey, whatever, and like, you know, okay, whatever. But like, I also don't think that library, given how powerful it is, even if I was on the draw, right? You're on the play. You go turn 1. Choose your deck. What's your turn 1?
I mean, Goblin Guide.
All right, you went turn 1 Goblin Guide. Perfect.
You asked. Hey, you asked.
So even in this scenario, you go turn 1 Goblin Guide, attack me. I draw a land.
Oh no!
And now
what I do?
I'm already discarding, or my 7 is thrown off. Even if you went turn 1 threat at all, and then I go library, go draw a card in the end step, I now have to then go, okay, untap, draw, play another thing. I'm now walking myself into Daze decks. I'm exposing myself to every Wasteland possibility.
Man.
It just seems like it's not like, obviously drawing cards for at that rate is insane, right? But the way that the hoops that you have to jump through in current Legacy just seems untenable. It just seems like not a reasonable thing that you can reliably do.
Yeah.
And like, if you're drawing in the late game, right? Nice colorless land that does fucking shit.
I mean, wouldn't you just rather have Search for Azcanta in your deck? I feel like, you know, if you're going to go long, that does almost everything that you're trying to do, and like you're getting the value of the not the scry. It's not a scry.
And as somebody who's played a lot of search, it's surveil. It's just not labeled as surveil. It's my pet peeve. WotC, fucking use your keywords.
Yeah.
But like as somebody who's played a lot of Search for Azcanta, I have 2 altered Search for Azcantas. I would love to be able to play them. They're not good enough.
They're not good right now.
They're just not good enough.
I mean, Blue Red Delver's too fast. We've already established that.
It's too fast. Every deck that has access to red is playing 4 Pyroblast. If you flip it, it flips into a Wasteland target. It's just not good.
Yeah.
But the idea that the card that you just associated to Library of Alexandria, the closest thing is fucking Search for Azcanta. It seems like it's a pretty safe thing. And the games where I am trying to navigate a game to continue to draw cards with library while you are punishing me on the table for using that opportunity to go up cards, and then somehow having to deploy those cards being back a land drop if those cards are color intensive, because library can't cast swords, can't cast bolt, can't cast any other removal spell unless I'm making deck building concessions in some way by playing shit like Dismember, in which case I'm also then hurting my life total even further. I mean, there's a lot of texture.
Yeah,
this card creates it's not like Mind Twist, which creates no fucking texture. Fuck Mind Twist. But Library of Alexandria, it does.
Out to Mind Twist players.
Like I'm thinking that like if they were to take things off the ban list to just make us think about, to open our minds with new toys of like what the possibilities are, I am fascinated by what the possibilities of Library of Alexandria could be. And I also equally think that there are none.
Yeah.
I'm like as excited to be like, what are all the possibilities? And just also thinking like there are zero and it will just fail. In which case it seems like a perfect unban. From that argument, it just seems like it's the perfect unban. It does everything and nothing. It's perfect.
It'll have people thinking, but it probably won't result in too much.
Anyway, that's so addendum to our ban list article. I thought it was an interesting poll. I think that there's other spots. I mean, from my standpoint, like Urza Saga is one of the most powerful lands ever and is obviously and objectively broken and is too powerful for legacy, but we've just been acclimated to the power creep and we've kind of gaslit ourselves to understand that, okay, we'll just live with Urza Saga. But I think library is fine. I think it's fine.
Well, I guess I think that's where we should stop.
I think that's it.
We should stop.
Who's the Beatdown Unban Library? See you next week.
Who's the Beatdown Unban Library? Before we go, I did want to thank all of our Patreon supporters. You guys are helping us upgrade the cast, so I really appreciate that. Like I said, we became a business this week. If you get a chance and you found this entertaining or helpful in some way, please like and subscribe. That really helps us out. It keeps a lot of things going for us. It keeps me very motivated to keep doing these higher end videos. So that always helps.
I do want to also, I didn't mention it earlier, but anytime you see somebody share a what's the play of like what you would do in a scenario, rather than think like, okay, just looking objectively at like what the cards are and what's going on, I would say take a step back and look at the matchup and assess where you think in this position, who the beatdown is, given the context of what is available in that suggestion of what's the play, and analyze it from that. And you might recognize that your first instinct of what you think is the best line may not actually be the optimal line in that particular scenario. It's cool experiment.
Yeah. I think that's it for us today.
I think that's it. I think that's how we do it.
Have a good one, everybody. Phil, I'll catch you next week.
Next week. Peace. Deuces.
Hey, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out this other video, and if you can, please support us on patreon.com.